Testing, 1, 2, whoa.
Should we use it? Do we need the microphone?
Yes.
What do you think? Yes? Okay. Okay.
Well, I guess first thing is, Lewis introduced me as the interviewer and Monk as the interviewee. Monk is actually, I've done a lot of interviews in the course of 25 years of radio, but Monk has me beat. So the truth is, if anybody should be the interviewer between the two of us, it probably should be Monk. But as Monk and I discussed before we arrived here this morning, and we thank you all for coming out to hear what we have to say and hopefully learn a few things about this great American art form. This is not going to be an interview. Again, we've done our share of interviews. This is going to be a discussion, and it's not just going to be between Monk and I, because certainly we want you to be a part of this as well, and I know that there'll be some questions that you have throughout the course of the time. So again, if you're expecting, so Monk, how did you get started in the business?
Well, let me tell you,
Yeah.
it all started when I saw my first clearing.
So we're not going to treat this as really a formal interview. It's going to be more of a discussion. So with that being said, Monk, how really did you get started in the business? No. I guess we have to start with at some point. Actually, I want to just start with a quote. And the quote is, "Life is a lot like jazz. It's best when you improvise." And that quote comes from somebody that hopefully everyone in this room has heard of, a gentleman by the name of George Gershwin. And when you think of jazz, at least for me, improvisation is, I think, the first thing that comes to mind. Monk joked about rehearsing holding up his book. And the truth is, I think the less rehearsals you do, and the less scripted things are in jazz, the more fun jazz can be. And life can be the same way. It's all about improvising from an hour-to-hour basis. And this music has been improvised now for over 100 years, and it's our music. It's American music. So I guess the word jazz to you, when the first word that pops into your mind when you hear the word jazz is what? And then from that question is, when did you first latch on to this music?
I usually think of a scenario of a combo, a jazz combo. A typical jazz combo usually has somebody sort of out front. If you were the spotlight operator at a jazz show that had a spotlight, your job would be to focus on who's playing the lead. And sometimes people are confused by that. How do they know what they're doing? Who's the leader here? But I think of a piano, bass, and drums, and perhaps a saxophone player, and perhaps a trumpet player, so a quintet. And I think of swing. One of the questions that I asked fairly often when I was doing interviews for this oral history project was, can you define swing? And most musicians would go, no. And then, of course, they would try. But I love things that can't be totally defined. We can say that swing is, if you're a musician and you first learn about quarter notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you learn about eighth notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and where you're dividing the beat in half evenly. Well, when Mozart wrote bum, 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 he was dividing the eighth notes evenly. When Louis Armstrong played eighth notes, he started playing bo, ba-doo, 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 ba, almost like skipping. That is one part of swing, where do-da-da, da-do-da-do-da-da-da-do-da is not written like that. it's written, if you look at it, if a classical music plays in the mood, they play da da dee da 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 dee da 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 da. But that's not how the way jazz musicians play it. They swing it. And it inspires dancing. So when I think of jazz, I think of swing. I think of my favorite musicians and the way they improvise, and what improvising actually means to me, which we can talk about later. But what was the first jazz you heard?
I guess I was in the womb, probably, because my dad has been playing piano since he met my mom in the Catskill Mountains, so first jazz I heard was my dad playing at the piano. I mean, I can't pinpoint a particular song, and again, I probably through the first 10 years of my life, I really couldn't grasp what my dad did, but I always knew that there were two things I remember always being a part of around the house, and that was smelling the smoke of his cigarettes and hearing the notes on the piano. I did take, people always ask me, oh, you're a radio person, well, you must have played a musical instrument. And I did play piano a little bit, and when they hear that my dad was a pianist, they automatically think that my dad was my teacher, which is actually not the case. I actually learned piano from a trombonist, if you can believe that, who is a pit musician on Broadway. I actually went to high school with his son, but no, my dad was always so busy doing different jobs. And I think my dad probably would have been almost, sometimes a father is extra tough on their son, and so when I expressed an interest to learn the piano, we both agreed that this friend of his, who just happened to play trombone, but also knew the nuances of the piano, would teach me. But really, and I didn't pursue it really beyond high school. Full disclosure, my first ever instrument that I played was a violin. And I didn't stick with that either. But again, I could. People say, can I sit down and play at a piano? Perhaps. If there's music in front of me, I can somehow get through it. Whereas, my father can do something that still amazes me to this day, and the older I get, the more I appreciate it. Again, he can sit down at a piano with no music and play the simplest of songs. I mean, what's maybe the simplest song that we can think of? Happy Birthday. And my father has this innate ability, as do many musicians, to be able to sit down and play Happy Birthday in a way that I never knew was possible. I mean, whether it's doing it as a stride piano way, or doing it as a slow ballad, or speeding it up. And again, my dad plays his best when there's no music in front of him. He just has this ability to play songs, many of them from the Great American Songbook, the great songwriters like the Irving Berlins, like the Gershwins, songs that my dad has played countless times, but he's never played it the same twice. And that's the beauty of jazz, and I'm sure Monk can speak on, and I'm sure you learned this from doing a lot of the interviews that you did, that no matter the popularity of a song, whether it's When I Fall in Love, or whether it's Polka Dots and Moonbeams, or Bye Bye Blackbird, you can hear it 100 times, but every time you hear it, there's always going to be something different about it. It's not going to be like a pop song that you hear on the radio over and over again, and nothing changes about it. Whereas with jazz, you can take one song, and whether it's a key change, or a chord change, a tempo change, you can give a song a whole new life, but still stay true to the original form of the song and the way the composer meant it to be written. And again, I think that's what fascinates me about jazz from when I was a young kid to my days in radio to now kind of focusing on a different aspect of the music, that it's just fascinating to hear a song for the 150th time, and it never gets old. And I'm sure for you, whether it's your own experience as a musician or just admiring other musicians, it's fun to hear a song twisted around, and it probably gives you new ideas as well.
Absolutely. Is that what you call improv?
I was just gonna, thank you. I just was gonna throw the question out. I was gonna ask you, what do you think, anybody have a short answer, what you think jazz musicians are doing when they improvise? Anybody wanna venture even a thought about it? Yeah.
They're having fun.
They're having fun.
That's right.
Sometimes with, especially with the music of the era of the Great American Songbook, it sounded like they were having fun. Now, sometimes when we get into music of the 60s, free jazz and so forth, many people thought that music was very angry. And sometimes it was, but oftentimes it was not. You have to be careful what you read into, what you think a musician is saying to you, or if they're actually saying anything. But they're usually having fun, but there's a magic about improvising, but it's not quite as mysterious as many people think. If you're playing a song, let's say like All of Me, it's got a very nice melody, and I think it's 16 measures long. Most jazz musicians, they read, when they see jazz music, they are looking at what's called a lead sheet. Has the melody on one staff. If you know piano music, you know piano music usually has a treble and a bass staff. Everything is written out, and you play what's written. Someone else wrote it. When you play a jazz tune, it has the melody. It does not have a bass clef part. It has, above the melody, it has chord symbols. It might say C, it might say E7, and then it might say A minor 7 flat 5, and it can get really complicated. The jazz musicians, that is their alphabet. And when they play All of Me, someone in the band, if it's the type of group I was describing before, if it's a quartet, let's say it's piano, bass, drums, and saxophone, usually the saxophone player plays the melody. And they may play fairly much like it was written, or they may mess around with it. When it gets to the end of the melody, that's where the part of the music starts that many people are confused by. They'll say, I like jazz until they start doing that. What are they doing?
Right.
How do they know when another person should do whatever they're doing? And I understand that that's confusing, but for most jazz people for many years, what they're doing is they're following the song again. The trio plays the music, the accompaniment again, and the person in the spotlight improvises over the song. Instead of playing the melody, they improvise a new melody. Now that new melody may be very convoluted. And that's because they've practiced for years, and they're following the chord changes, and most important, they're using their ears. There's been many famous jazz musicians who didn't know that much music theory, but they had these wonderful ears, and they could hear how to follow, negotiate their way through the chord changes. And for me, that's sort of the magic of jazz. You can analyze it to a certain point, but then you get to the point where it's magic. And I don't want to know, if you could explain all magic things, they wouldn't be magic anymore. So I get to a point where, as far as the theory of jazz, I sort of draw the line and say, okay, that's enough. I don't really need to know why that person did it. They did it because they wanted to, and it sounded good.
You're gonna hold on. I'm gonna project. I hope people can hear me, because I want Monk to hang on to the mic here for a second. How many of you in this room have been to a jazz concert? Excellent. All right.
Ask him how many people listen to jazz on the radio on purpose.
Purpose.
Okay?
That's good.
All right,
All right.
Well, you know, for 25 years I played jazz on the radio, and listening to jazz on the radio is one thing. But when you talk about magic, which Monk just mentioned, to be able to be at a live jazz event, whether it be at a festival, and we've had many festivals here in Syracuse. We've been fortunate to have the Syracuse Jazz Festival, which has been going for over 30 years. The Northeast Jazz and Wine Festival, which has been going now for over 20 years downtown. Whether it's a festival setting or whether it's an intimate club setting, to be able to see the unspoken language that is jazz between the musicians. Obviously you can't see that on radio. You can hear it, and again, radio paints a picture. Whether it's listening to a sporting event and imagining what's happening in the game, or listening to a live jazz trio, listening to Oscar Peterson's trio play in a mellow tone, recorded live, let's say at the Montreux Jazz Festival in Switzerland. And listening to it is one thing, but to be this close, to be in the front row, and the trio, let's say, is here. And there are many jazz rooms around the country and around the world where you're literally right there. I mean, you could practically touch the musician. But to be able to sit in a jazz club in an intimate setting and be able to hear, usually it's probably the drummer, or it doesn't have to be, but they'll just count a 1, a 2, a 1, 2, 3, and then right away they start, and they may go for 3, 4 minutes, they may jam for 10, 12 minutes. But it's not about just listening and like singing along to, like Monk mentioned, All of Me, and sure, of course, it's natural to maybe mouth the words to the song. But I think the magic of jazz, and especially of improvising, and especially of seeing it live, is to see the interplay between the musicians. They're not talking to each other, but they're all speaking the same language. If it's a quintet, somehow, some way, the pianist, the bassist, the drummer, the guitarist, the saxophonist, they all take their solos. They all somehow know when it's their time. Now there might be a little subtle, okay, glance, your turn. I'm not saying that it's all telepathy, but that for me is something that really drew me to this music, and I will always appreciate seeing jazz in person more than listening to it on radio or listening to it on the computer, because nothing, absolutely nothing, beats seeing it live and seeing how these musicians just somehow know that they're gonna start in one place. There's going to be a starting point. There's going to be a finish line. What happens in between? Who knows? They may take some detours here and there, but it's the journey of how they get from the 1, a 2, a 1, 2, 3, 4 to that little bassy ending at the end. It's the journey that's the fun part. Monk, being a musician, that unspoken language for you, having been a part of, I mean, you've recorded CDs, you've played in groups. Sometimes you might play with a musician you've never even met before. And you could get 3 or 4 guys that get together that are jammed. They've never played together before in their lives, but yet, you know what? The tune gets called out, and 10 minutes later, magic happens. I mean, what is that about, just being able to just connect with musicians that maybe you've never even seen before, but yet you're thinking along the same wavelength?
I have this weird analogy I sometimes think of when I watch the NBA All-Star game. You got all the greatest basketball players, right? And when they go out on the court, there's a center and there's 2 guards and there's 2 forwards. And those guys know how to play together, even though they're not on the same team. They know the moves to make, they have their assigned roles. At the same time, they're improvising. If a play doesn't go the way they think one guy's ready to step in. Well, it's very typical these days for a jazz musician to get a gig and then find a band. You get, it could be any kind of gig. It could be, playing for a cocktail hour somewhere. It actually could be a gig in an art center. And because it's so difficult these days for an individual jazz musician to keep a working band together, that means that I have 4 other musicians who are committed to me. They're only going to play with me. It's almost impossible. So you get a gig, then you open your phone book, and you start calling the people, your A people, then your B people. And sometimes you may end up playing with people you've never played before. I've certainly done gigs as a saxophone player where nobody in the band has ever played before. And when you get there, if you're smart, you'll start out with a song that any self-respecting jazz musician should know. You might say, okay, fellas, don't get around much anymore. And you don't have to say what key it's in, because all these musicians should know the standard key from the Great American Songbook is C. Now, if you want to do it in something else, you have to say it. If you say, okay, don't get around much anymore, C sharp, everybody in the band's going to, really? You're going to make me work that hard? And you don't do that because it's not going to sound as good, right? It's no way to start a gig. Now that, we make a joke, we might say, you look at the drummer and you go, you play in C sharp, right? That's a joke, everybody. But there is a whole format of what musicians know how to do. They know that the leader is probably going to play the melody, and he may take the first improvised solo, and we don't know how long that person's going to improvise. We call it, if you go around once, that's called one chorus. Now, the person, very unlikely to say, okay, I'm going to play the melody. I'm going to play 3 choruses, then the piano player, you do 2, and then we'll let the bass player play 1, and then we'll exchange 4s with the drums, and then I'll play them. They don't do any of that. A person knows if he's winding down his solo, there's a way to play that if the band is paying attention, they say, okay, this person's done, and then a saxophone player may literally turn while they're playing, and they'll turn to the piano player, and the piano player will see that. It's a signal. The leader may do this to the band subtly. They don't do this. They turn around so that you can't see, and they'll hold up 4, and they'll look at the drums. And that means the band's going to play 4 measures, the drummer gets a 4-bar solo, and we go back and forth until we go around the chorus of the song. And if the leader goes like this, means I'm going to play the melody now, and we're going to end the song. And all this stuff just happens organically. And you don't learn it in music school. You learn it as a young person trying to sit in and learning from your mentors. You try to find a mentor and watch. The idea of watching is extremely important. Paying attention and being in the moment. Louis, did you have something?
Well, I understand this language, or this the way you pass the music off during the gig or during the playing of the gig. And I always thought I see him nod their head towards the next player, and I also think that they have a way of saying, when you hear this, that means you're going to come in the next 2 measures or something like that. I think they tell each other when they're going to get close to where the next guy is going to be the soloist.
Yes, you tell them by the way you're playing. If you're really getting into it and you're getting near the end of the form of the song, it's usually 16 or 32 measures, you can tell if somebody's really wailing and they're getting to the end of the chorus. It's very unlikely that they're going to stop at the end of it. They're going to go around again. And sometimes you get players who go around again too many times, right? Like, okay, well, we've played a long time now, and that can get awkward. But the players from the,
all right.
the players from the 30s and the 40s, they knew that there's how to be polite, and a lot of times that was partly because of the technology of the time. When they made jazz records back then, if they were on 78s, they had a 3-minute or 3-minute and 15 seconds limit. Then the record ran out. So they knew in the recording studio that they could only play 2 choruses so everybody could get a chance, and that would translate into a live performance too.
So again, I mean, there is a language that is spoken that the audience might not quite understand, but every player on the stage understands. It might be, again, it might be hand signals, it just might be, you know, just a quick little nod when a soloist is wrapping up to let the group know that we're going back to the chorus. But there is that unspoken language of jazz that you can only truly appreciate when seeing it live. Listening to it on radio, listening to it on vinyl, which is coming back, by the way. I want to let people know that the day of the CD is going bye-bye. Records are coming back, all right? So we're coming full circle, yes. So I hope people still have their turntables, because vinyl is coming back in a big way. If we don't shift gears and start to talk about this amazing book, then Monk's going to hold a grudge against me. And so we really need to devote some time, and we can continue talking about jazz improvisation. I mean, we could spend a whole hour on that, but we don't have 2 or 3 hours. I wish we did, but we don't. So I really want to shift gears and talk about this incredible book, Jazz Tales from Jazz Legends, and it's just incredible. I have not had a chance to read through each interview in its entirety, but just thumbing through it and getting a chance to read excerpts from the interviews that Monk has done, as someone myself who had a chance to do radio interviews. Monk had a chance to actually sit down. These are all videotaped interviews, which, by the way, now are available on a YouTube channel. And I want to mention, Monk, this whole project, this whole project began in 1995, and YouTube itself was founded in 2005. Okay, so 10 years before this gigantic video sharing service began, Monk, with help from, obviously, with the generosity of Milt Fillius, and of course, the man for whom the Jazz Directors Post is named at Hamilton College, Joe Williams, they were huge benefactors in getting this project off the ground. But for the first 10 years, there wasn't a YouTube where an interview would be videotaped and then you could see it online. Now, of course, there is a YouTube channel, so for those of you who are computer savvy and get to see YouTube on occasion, I strongly advise you to go to the Fillius Jazz Archive YouTube page. There's a nice little introductory video from Monk himself, and then there's just tons and tons, hours and hours and hours of videos, mostly conducted by Monk, with some of the biggest names in the history of jazz. And I guess I wanted to ask you, you are the Joe Williams director of the Fillius Jazz Archive, and I know that the late, great Joe Williams, outstanding jazz vocalist, was the first jazz artist, I believe, to be bestowed an honorary degree and Hamilton. So just your personal relationship with Joe and really your recollections of the genesis of how this began. And did you ever think from the beginning in 1995 that 325 interviews and a book later, this jazz archive would really take on an entire life of its own? It's really a jazz encyclopedia that people can really learn from just by seeing these interviews.
I was very lucky. I started at Hamilton teaching as an adjunct, teaching saxophone. And around 1994, there was a fellow named Milt Fillius who has now passed away. He was a Hamilton class of 1944. They called it the crazy mixed up years of Hamilton, where many of the young men came to Hamilton, then they left to serve in World War II, and then they came back. Milt was a passionate lover of jazz, specifically jazz till about 1950. He loved the big bands, he loved small combos. His tastes in music were very clear cut. He hated bebop, but he loved swing. He also did very well in his life financially. And Hamilton, if you know anything about universities and academia, the development office is very concerned about keeping their major donors happy. And Milt was a major donor to Hamilton. He was a life trustee, and he got this idea after listening to Joe Williams and a bassist named Milt Hinton sitting at a table trading stories about their careers. And Milt was observing this and listening to this. Says, this is what we got to get. We got to get the musicians talking about their lives. So he proposed this idea to Hamilton, and he said, I can fund it through a foundation. He was president of a foundation that gave out money, and he was a very forceful man. He said, I will fund this, but I want the college to take it on. And the college called over to the music department and said, do you have anybody over there who can make Milt happy? They didn't say it in those words, but I found out. I found out afterwards that was their goal. Make Milt happy, keep him happy. And so we started this project, and we started going around the country to jazz events and gatherings. At the time, we were carrying 9 road cases worth of gear. We had cameras at that time were like this. There was nothing digital, and I had the AV guy at Hamilton. It was a big operation. We were concentrating first on people who played with Joe Williams, Count Basie alums. Joe had a great career with the Basie band for about 6 years. And Joe was a dear friend of Milt's. They were buddies, and Joe agreed to let his name be associated with this operation. He did 4 or 5 interviews himself. But I was allowed, when I got on the phone with some musician, to say, hi, my name is Monk Rowe. I'm calling from Hamilton College and for Joe Williams. And that helped me get in the door. Milt had a list of about 30 people he wanted us to get, and we got them within the first year, and then we just kept going. He learned to sort of trust my judgment, and since then we've done almost 350 now. And we started out obviously with the elderly musicians, because that was Milt's motivation. He saw all his favorite musicians were passing away. He said, well, we got to do something here. I think the oldest musician I interviewed was 95, and now the youngest one I've done has been like 21. So, anybody have any questions at this point?
How'd you get the name Monk?
If you want to hang out afterwards, I'll tell the story.
I mean, if there ever was a jazz name, if there ever was, I mean, it's like calling him Hip Rowe. Okay? Monk just immediately sends a message, there's a jazz relationship.
Yes.
And
That does.
how did the day he was born, they decided to call him Monk, and he was going to end up in the world of jazz?
Yeah.
I mean, how did?
Yes.
I mean, I was almost named Dizzy Cohen, but
Dizzy Cohen, oh man.
they went with Eric
Yeah.
instead. They felt, yeah.
You would have been destined for it.
But Monk Rowe just fits. It's such a great,
Yes.
it's such a great jazz name, you know. I mean, he was not meant to be a plumber. I'll tell you that.
Yes.
Play at Birdland?
Pardon?
Birdland?
Did I ever play at Birdland?
How many times?
I never played at Birdland. No. But I've been there, and many of the people that I interviewed certainly played at Birdland. There's more than one Birdland too. You know, it's moved around like many of the clubs in New York.
So Dizzy Gillespie, Gene Krupa.
Sure, very famous.
How many people in this room are familiar or fans of Glenn Miller? Glenn Miller Orchestra. Yeah? We got a few here. I wanted to bring up a snippet in the book which fascinated me. You went to see the Glenn Miller Orchestra in Rochester with your parents back in 1964, and then you eventually got to interview a gentleman who was a part of Glenn Miller's first ever band. It was a very short-lived group, a gentleman by the name of Jerry Jerome. And I was just wondering, as somebody who got to see Glenn Miller's orchestra as a kid in the 60s, and you were a kid in the 60s.
Yes, I was.
And then you get to interview somebody who was a part of Glenn's first band. Do you have any recollections of that, of chatting with Jerry Jerome? I mean, and what that was like?
I was fortunate when I got most of my jazz knowledge from reading the back of LPs. I mean, I would go to the record store and I'd look and then I'd turn them over and I'd read this stuff. I wasn't that great a student memorizing chemistry tables or any of that, but I remembered the stuff that I read on these record labels. And so when I saw the name Jerry Jerome was going to be at this one festival, he was in his 80s at that time. I remember, oh my God, he was on the first short-lived Glenn Miller Orchestra. Glenn tried to start this band and it didn't make any money, so it folded. And a couple years later, he started his next band, and he said, "Jerry, come back." And Jerry said, "No, I'm doing other things, but I'll recommend someone." He recommended Tex Beneke, who became like Glenn's tenor soloist. But Jerry he was a very interesting man. He was in medical school. He was going to be a doctor, and then he got waylaid by the jazz life. And he had a great career. So that was a real thrill because Glenn Miller is why I started playing the saxophone. My parents had those records and I'd hear ba-ba-da-ba-ba-ba-da-ba-da. Oh, I have to do that. And eventually
You went from a trombone to a saxophone?
Pardon?
You went from Glenn Miller's trombone to a saxophone.
He did?
You did?
No. I started on the clarinet actually, and I'm very happy that Mr. El Piatto in the 7th grade said, "I need a saxophone player." And so I moved to the saxophone, and it was a very good move.
You've loved it ever since. I wanted to bring up another, the great thing about Monk's book is it's divided into chapters. One of the chapters which got me, chapter 6 in this book, is called The Color of Jazz. And during various decades in jazz, there were definitely a lot of hardships, a lot of racial injustices that were happening in the country, and especially with jazz bands, and especially with African American musicians back when segregation was a major issue in this country. But there were racial inequalities on the other side as well. And there was something that caught my eye in chapter 6 of this book, which deals with the color of jazz. And these are interviews where the topic of race is discussed by a number of different artists. And Monk had the good fortune of speaking with the great drummer Louis Bellson. Louis Bellson spent time in the Tonight Show band, right? Among other fabulous orchestras. Well, He was a part of Duke Ellington's orchestra in the early 1950s, and at the time, Louis Bellson was the only white player in Duke Ellington's orchestra. And he was once asked, and this is in the book, he was once asked to become, quote, non-white, so the band could keep him on stage. So here was a white drummer. You often think about the racial inequalities where, again, African-American musicians had it very difficult for many, many years. But in this case, here was an all-black band with a white drummer, and he was asked to become non-white, I mean, if that's even possible, so in order for the band to be able to keep him on the stage. I mean, again, not that you can remember every little single detail in the book. Do you want me to try to find the, I can tell you the pages on it. It's on page...
Yeah, Ellington was part of a thing they called the Big Tour of 1951.
Yeah.
It was all people, Nat King Cole, the Ellington Orchestra, other people. And they were going to go down in the South. And the tour manager, the booker, said, well, you can't take Louis Bellson, because you have an all-black band and you have one white person, and you can't, the band's white and black musicians couldn't be on the stage at the same time. And so Duke, they had rehearsed backing up all these singers, and I can't get a different drummer, so he asked Louis if he would mind being a Haitian. So Louis pretended to be a Haitian, and they went down there, and it's a really remarkable quote, because he talks about the fact that they go down there, and of course he couldn't stay in the same hotel, or vice versa. The black musicians couldn't stay in the white hotels. And what happened oftentimes was that the townspeople would put them up. The black bands would go to a certain part of the town, the Basie band and so forth, and they would know ahead of time, word got out, what families would put musicians up. And they'd put 2 or 3 in a room, and that's a lot of times how they would avoid the hotel problem. Some groups like Ellington and Cab Calloway would get their own Pullman car, and they would just stay on the train. So it was very illuminating. And there's another story in that chapter I'll briefly tell you. Joe Wilder was a magnificent gentleman, trumpet player, who aspired to a career as a classical musician as he was growing up in the late 30s. Well, there was no such thing for a black musician. There was no orchestras in the country that would hire a black trumpet player. So he went the big band route, and he was going down in the South in the late 40s with the Lucky Millender Band. And they were going to Charleston, and the band pulled up in front of the place, and the sheriff, and they had 4 white guys in the band. And the sheriff pulled up with his deputy, and Joe tells the story that the guy goes, who's in charge here? And Lucky Millender goes, well, I am. And he says, well, I'm just here to tell you there's going to be no mixed bands playing in Charleston tonight. And Lucky Millender said, this is not a mixed band. And so the sheriff lined him up, and he went down to each person. He said, are you colored? And everybody in the band, including the white guys, said, yes, I'm colored. And you get to the end, and the last guy, who was a trombone player, had a slight lisp. He said, are you colored? He goes, certainly. And so at the end of the whole story, Joe says, well, the sheriff said, well, I guess if they all say they're colored, there's nothing we can do about it, is there? And they got in their car and they drove away. And this stuff happened a lot. And sometimes it wasn't really funny what happened to these musicians. You know, yes?
Apropos that topic of race and jazz and music generally, I don't know how many people here are able to stay up late enough to watch the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, but they have a house band called The Roots,
right?
Who I think are from Philly.
Philly, right? Yeah.
And every once in a while I look and I think I see a horn player, possibly one that might be white in that band, led by a man Questlove.
Right, on drums, yeah.
But otherwise, it's exclusively a African-American band. There obviously is not the sort of legal prejudice that the horrific days of segregation mandated, but what's up with that? Are they just, did they just pick, I mean, everybody's free to assemble into a group that they want to form, but isn't that kind of ironic?
Tom, I think it's a matter of the leadership saying, see if we can get. And then.
I'm not saying there's discrimination.
Right.
I don't think there's
That's not how that
discrimination anymore in the world of jazz and that. I can't imagine anybody having a taste for discrimination in that culture at all.
Well, I'm not saying there is, but it's ironic.
Yeah, I mean,
See, this,
it's ironic in that really Jimmy Fallon's band right now, the Tonight Show band, is made up mostly African American band. The Stephen Colbert Show, his band is mostly an African American band. You know, late night band, Jimmy Kimmel's band, on the other hand, I don't believe there is an African American in that band. Okay, so I mean, it's interesting how late night bands have changed over the years. Now I know, I mean, the original from the original Tonight Show band to the going back to the Steve Allen and Jack Parr days to Johnny's band, which of course incorporated white and African American artists. When you think of Ed Shaughnessy on drums, you think of Clark Terry, the late great Clark Terry, who Joe Williams actually interviewed, right, as part of the archive. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think there's. I think it's just by choice by the host of the show as far as how they choose their band, and I think nowadays there's certainly more African American musicians as part of late night bands than there certainly were 30, 40 years ago. So again, it's the late night music scene, just like jazz itself, is ever evolving, and who knows, what late night television and what late night bands are going to be like 10 years from now. Personally, I will say this, and I am old enough to appreciate Johnny Carson when he was hosting the Tonight Show. For me personally, the Tonight Show band, I mean, there was no band like it. I mean, Doc Severinsen, Tommy Newsom, all the people, that Tonight Show orchestra, when the drums hit and it just da 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 da, I mean, it just was the way a late night band was meant to sound, in my eyes. Now, David Letterman and Paul Schaefer, they had their own thing going, but there was just something about that Tonight Show band over the years, right up until Johnny passed. And then when Jay Leno took over, the band changed and Kevin Eubanks became the leader, and you didn't have that big band feel, but there was something about Johnny and his band, and I know you've interviewed a lot of people who were in that band. Johnny knew all the guys too. I mean, it wasn't just, he and Doc were the ones that had the interplay. Doc was involved in a lot of the skits on the show, but the truth is that Johnny knew every person in that band and respected every person in that band, and the band truly appreciated Johnny in return.
Questions?
Yeah, this has nothing to do with the bands,
Yeah.
but I wanted to know how the vocalists fit in, like Ella Fitzgerald, into the jazz groups, musically.
That's a very good question, and oftentimes, what makes a jazz singer a jazz singer? Oftentimes it's the kind of musicians that they surround themselves with. If they hire jazz musicians to play, then it depends on their repertoire, what they choose. Most people feel that a jazz singer ought to be able to take a melody and change it well, change it pleasingly. Ella Fitzgerald will sing a song, a standard, differently than Jack Jones might. Jack Jones not considered a jazz singer, but Ella had a lot of freedom to it. And then, of course, there's the scatting thing. We all know what scatting is. Ella certainly was a scat singer. She was incredible. So the vocalists have a funny place in jazz. I like to think, people say, what's the difference between jazz and blues? Well, blues, first of all, is predominantly a vocal music. It was sung first. Jazz is predominantly an instrumental music. Now, there's plenty of great jazz singers and there's good blues instrumentalists, but the jazz singer has to fit into the group. Most of the big bands at the time, sometimes just because they needed to get people in, they had what they called a boy singer and a girl singer. And they would come up and do 1 or 2 tunes a night. That's how Frank Sinatra got started with Harry James. But certainly jazz singers have a place in this world, and it's they tend to pack houses more than sometimes just instrumental groups. I don't know if I answered your question, but yes.
Yeah, that used to be a common definition of jazz singer. If you couldn't scat, you
Yeah.
couldn't consider it a jazz singer.
But you know, Billie Holiday is she's like one of the predominant jazz singers, and she never scatted at all.
Yeah, speaking of Billie Holiday, there's that story about when she was the vocalist with Hurdy Shaw,
Yeah.
and he wouldn't stay in some place unless they would let her stay in the same
Mhm.
hotel. And you mentioned Joe Williams, and I remember reading stories that there were times in his career when black-owned clubs in the South wouldn't hire him because they considered him too dark.
Wow. Yeah, things are just, sometimes you read things like one guy told me about the brown paper bag test in New Orleans. Like if you were darker than a brown paper bag, you couldn't go to the cotillions or that kind of like, oh my God, who thinks of these things, right? But that's the way it was. Yes.
We'll talk about a different aspect of diversity, although I will point out Benny Goodman was probably the first guy to have a fully integrated orchestra, and his goals were simple. I want the best musician for any instrument. The diversity I want to go down to is age diversity. Eric asked a question, I couldn't see the hands go up. How many people have seen a live jazz performance? If you haven't, you should be ashamed, because there's plenty of free opportunities in this town. But if you go to like the Northeast Jazz and Wine Fest, you get a sense that they ought to go after AARP as the naming sponsor. The audience tends to be a little bit older. We talk about improvisation being a major aspect of jazz. Jam bands, as they call them, like Fish, and, you know, I followed the Grateful Dead 40, 50 years ago, which kind of was my introduction to jazz. You know, how do we get these young kids who are following those bands to realize, hey, you know, they're riffing off of jazz, and you know what jazz is known for.
Wow. We'll take that question.
Yeah, Eric is,
We're out of time.
Eric tends to be the youngest person at all of CNY Jazz's concerts.
Yeah.
Still, I mean, eventually that won't be the case, but yeah. I mean, I think social media can play a part in that. You know, I think, you know, nowadays people have access, especially younger people, by clicking their mouse or by looking at their phone. There's a way that people can learn very quickly without having to take a jazz history class, learning who Charlie Parker is, or just doing a Google search. I mean, again, they may just stumble upon the word jazz, or they stumble upon the name Dizzy Gillespie, or Duke Ellington, or Ella Fitzgerald, or some of the names.
Stan Kenton.
Stan Kenton, Stan Getz, you know, Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross. With social media nowadays, and with YouTube, and with all these services that are out there, I do think that presents, it gives the new generations of jazz, new generations, a chance to hopefully appreciate where this music came from, and the people that laid the foundation for this music, and hopefully going forward for events like Northeast Jazz and Wine Festival. I mean, yeah, I've been on that stage for 20 some odd years, and I see the crowd out there, and I would like to see more young people. And I don't know, I don't think social media is the be-all, end-all. That's the answer. But I do agree that you know, jazz education, I do think is doing well in this country, but I think that, you know, there can always be more and more strides made. You're a jazz educator, Monk, so I mean,
Well, I
maybe
think
you could talk about how
jazz is in a very funny place right now.
it is. Yeah, it is.
Every couple of years, you'll see an article, someone in New York Times or in the jazz magazine, either jazz is dead or is jazz dead, question mark.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's because the journalists need something to write about. Jazz is certainly not dead, but it's really in a weird place because every university, every middle school, every high school has a jazz program, has a jazz band. At the same time, jazz musicians can't sell CDs. They have to sell them out of the trunk of their cars. They're not in the stores anymore. It's hard to get a gig. You can't keep bands together. The clubs, they charge so much that people don't go. And so it's in a weird place. It's not the popular music anymore. Jazz and swing-based music used to be pop music, popular, until rock and roll, until jazz became a little too complicated for many people and they turned to rock and roll. So I don't think jazz education should just focus on teaching people to play jazz. They need to have people who appreciate jazz. And I will admit that jazz can be a little challenging to listen to. It's not always easy, and it helps to know just a little bit about it, like we talked about. What are they doing up there? And if you understand a little bit what's going on, it helps to appreciate it. The jam bands, I think, are popular because those jam bands, a lot of times, they'll jam on one chord for 20 minutes. And it's easy to just like, to sort of like zone out and enjoy what they're doing, but you don't have to, quote, understand it even a little bit. It's more of rock jamming than jazz jamming. So, I knew this would go by in a hurry. I don't know.
I'd like to add a couple.
Do we have to end?
No.
I have a few books here if anybody's interested, by the way. And
Well, I want to. I'll let you. Underneath the stool that Monk is sitting on, I don't know. You can't see it in the back. Monk came with his horn. Have horn, will travel. In fact, there's a song called "Man with a Horn" that I believe Billie Holiday sang back in the day. But I guess a musician, you never know when a gig is going to come up, and so it's like, if you're a golfer, you always have your clubs in the trunk. If you're a saxophonist, I guess you always have your horn in the trunk. And I see that Monk has his horn here, and so I was going to maybe put Monk on the spot here. I figured there had to be a reason, unless you have a gig to get to.
No,
I thought maybe an appropriate way to kind of wrap up our little discussion here about this wonderful music was for you to enlighten our audience with Rhapsody in Blue, C sharp. No, I'm just kidding.
C sharp.
Yeah, right.
Before
Oh, yeah.
it goes, I suggest anybody who's got a computer or an iPhone or a Droid to go and seek out, just go to Google and say jazz music, and you're going to get a lineup. There are 5 great websites that play jazz, and one of them is WNYC. You'll come up and you'll go to, say, Great American Music. There is KKJZ out of California.
Yes.
Okay, and it is no hard feelings to the AER, but it
It's
is.
okay. I don't work there anymore.
It is great. WICN out of Worcester has got it together. There's a radio station in Jersey that broadcasts into the city. I forget the call letters, WBBG or something.
WBGO?
Right. I mean, it's just sitting there waiting to listen to. And the best part of it is it's free.
Yeah.
I mean, and you could hook it up. Today's mechanics, you could hook up your droid to the speakers, to a band set of speakers, and you can hook it up and it'll play right through the whole room, or through your whole apartment or your own house, if you like jazz.
And July 27th and 28th, the Northeast Jazz and Wine Fest in Clinton Square, free and open to the public.
What a not so subtle plug right there. But yes, downtown Syracuse at the end of July, there will be jazz. And there are a wealth of tremendous jazz musicians right here in Central New York. And you know, I mean, the musicians, a lot of the musicians, many musicians that Monk spoke with are names that are known the world over. Names like John Hendricks, Lionel Hampton, Marion McPartland, Phil Woods, Louis Belson, John Pizzarelli. But the great thing too is that Monk talks to a lot of musicians that maybe are not as well known. Sidemen. There's a whole chapter in this book that talk about the sidemen. And
there's a song called I
Want to Be a Sideman with Dave Freshberg, in fact. So it's not just the people that are on the marquee. It's not just the Ellington bands and the Count Basie bands, which, by the way, they're still going. I mean, with musicians now that are still carrying on the legacy of the Ellington band, the Basie band, the Woody Herman band. But we should all appreciate the quality of musicians that we have here in Central New York. There are a lot of areas around the country that have wonderful, wonderful regional orchestras. And I've said this at, Howie knows this, I've said this at every CNY Jazz event, and I'll say it here. The Central New York Jazz Orchestra, in fact, I'll do a quick plug. They're going to be performing at a concert, I'll be emceeing it, at Liverpool High School a week from 2 weeks from this Friday. Friday, June 1st, the Central New York Jazz Orchestra with a wonderful trombonist by the name of John Fetchock, and they're going to be doing Liverpool's what's called their Jumpin' Jazz Jam, where they're going to have the 3 student ensembles that are going to be performing, wonderful young musicians, and then the Central New York Jazz Orchestra, also young musicians, and they're going to be performing a set of music. And we are so fortunate in this area to have an orchestra that I feel, I don't want to call them a regional orchestra, because I put them up against any orchestra in the country, and yet these guys are here in Central New York, and they're just so gosh darn talented. And so for any of you who have never seen the CNY Jazz Orchestra, or who have never seen, let's say, a big band live, I know you've seen jazz shows, maybe you've seen a quartet, or maybe you've seen just a smaller group. If you've never seen a 15-piece orchestra swinging, I would tell you to check them out. Friday, June 1st, Liverpool High School Jumpin' Jazz Jam. But again, as Louis said, on your computer, there are so many services now where you can basically program what music you want to hear. It's not like the radio where, okay, man, I just wish you would play A-Train. I want to hear A-Train. I want to hear Jumping at the Woodside for the Count Basie Orchestra. Well, there are services now where, I think of one specifically called Spotify, which you can, you're going to hear Monk, and I'm going to shut up in just a second. You can literally type in what you want to hear and hear it immediately on the computer. And that's the world that we're living in. So, with that being said, though...
Hold on, one more.
Okay.
One more part of my gig.
Tune up, Monk, tune up. Okay.
Next week, right here in this room, ladies and gentlemen, Jim Burns is going to come and speak about cryptic currency. If anybody in this room knows what cryptic currency is, you're okay. It's basically Bitcoin. And if you want to understand Bitcoin, come. If you want to understand cryptocurrency, come. If you don't want to, come anyway, because it's what's happening a little bit. And believe it or not, cryptocurrency came through the jazz underworld.
You mean it was another way not to pay the
It
musician?
was another way for guys who were into weed to pay off each other because they couldn't do it with coin, with regular coin. And it's a whole different economic world, cryptocurrency.
I didn't think the word weed would come up at all in the conversation today.
I
but-
got a weed when I get home.
There you go, there you go. All right, you know what? I'm just gonna say these words. Ladies and gentlemen,
Monk.
Mr. Monk Rowe.
If you recall earlier in the thing we were talking about how jazz musicians work, you know, how they get together and play. A couple years ago, one of my other pleasurable jobs at Hamilton is to book musicians. Every year we have a thing called Fall Coming Jazz. Milt Fillius started it, I continued it when he died. And I get to book the musicians. So this one year I booked the Nikiforov Trio. She's a marvelous bassist, singer, piano trio. And during the concert they invited me up to play a number with them, probably because they knew I had their check. And so I called Summertime and I gave them the key. Told me everything went fine, and I played my tune, I was going to walk off stage, and Nikki goes, "No, play another one, play another one." So I was thinking, what can I play? And I took a gamble, and I went like this. And they immediately went, ba-da, ba-da. I played, ba-da. I didn't even say anything to them. And I played the first phrase of Don't Get Around Much Anymore, and bam, just like we had rehearsed it, the day came in, I said, boy, I was lucky. But I knew I wasn't lucky, because what would have surprised me is if they didn't do that. Because these were seasoned musicians, and everybody knows what to do when the horn player goes, ba-ba-da-ba-da-dum, bum, bum, ba-dum. And the thing went flawlessly, and I was very, very happy. But when I came in today, a person from Utica really surprised me. And she said, "I love that song you wrote called Firstborn. About 37 years ago, I wrote a song for my daughter and recorded it. It was called Firstborn. So I'm going to play that for you because why not?"
All right.
So here you go.
Mr. Monk Rowe, Firstborn. We started with a quote. I'm going to end with this quote. I have to get this quote out there. This is from the great clarinetist by the name of Pete Fountain, and I think it kind of sums it up pretty well. If you're making money, people don't think you're playing jazz. When you're not making money, they think you're a great musician. Thank you guys for being a great audience. It's been our pleasure.
Thank you. I'm going to take a picture.